Graphic oral sex in high school poetry. Analysis of My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Roethke. For a few years, I taught English and Lit at the York Castle High School, one of the top schools in Jamaica. This was a fine opportunity for me to get even deeper into poetry. However, as I delved into the CSEC poem listings and picked apart each poem line by line, I started to see a few dark patterns, such that were imperceptible with skimming and light reading. Physical and sexual abuse seemed to be an undercurrent that ran sneakily through several of the poems. For the most part, I stuck to the CSEC level analytical methods while teaching the poems, discussing the effectiveness of literary devices, crafting academic answers to general comprehension questions. The things my pervasive eyes tracked and traced through these poems were too much for the students to handle. But now, the silence must be broken. This time, I will look at a poem by Theodore Roethke, My Papa's Waltz. If you're under 18, then this poetry lesson is not for you. Welcome back to Between the Lines. I'm your host, Adam Webb. Naturally, we begin by reading the poem. My Papa's Waltz by Theodore Roethke. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt, then waltzed me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. Let's have a look at the poem's form. There's nothing crazy going on here. We have a relatively short poem of 4 stanzas, each of 4 lines. The common A-B rhyme scheme is used, while there is deviation from perfect rhymes to slant rhymes at some points. For example, easy rhymes with dizzy. This slantness of the rhymes mirrors the staggering movements of the drunken waltz. The poem's meter also musically reflects a waltz. It's written in iambic trimeter, which means each line has 3 dominant beats, or 3 stressed syllables. Listen to the beat as I reread stanza 1. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy, but I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. Padum padum padum, padum padum padum. So form-wise, we stay true to the rhythm of a waltz. This poem seems to express a complete idea every 2 lines, so for the most part, we'll analyze the poem couplet by couplet. Well, let's get into it. The whiskey on your breath could make a small boy dizzy. Here we see hyperbole along with some interesting diction. Whiskey begins to give us thematic possibilities. This poem could get into alcoholism, which segues naturally into abuse and escapism. Interestingly, whiskey dick refers to impotence caused by heavy drinking. Whether whiskey in particular was chosen to capture this meaning is something we might be able to answer later. Speaking of diction, the use of small as opposed to little to describe the boy is a bit curious. Small connotes a focus on size rather than age. We will see if this bears any significance as we proceed. Breath adds yet another layer of rhythmicality, which we will build on as we follow the waltz of the poem. Breathing is naturally steady and rhythmical. More pointedly, a breath mark is a musical notation that tells performers when to take a breath, or a rest. This referenced rest that hides within the breath in line 1 subtly identifies a struggle between rest and liveliness, between life and death. This is a struggle we will see more of as we continue. Now let's get back to that hyperbole we mentioned earlier. Stating that the whiskey on a man's breath would be enough to intoxicate someone is a little over the top, but we'll soon get into what this intoxication really is. Let's continue. But I hung on like death. Such waltzing was not easy. Here we see metaphor, hyperbole, simile, irony, juxtaposition. For these lines, let's break down what poetic devices contribute in terms of meaning. Through simile, the tenacity of the boy's clinging is compared to the permanence of death's grip. Just as when you die, you stay dead, so the boy is clinging to his father with no intention of letting go. This hanging on like death is also hyperbolic, since he couldn't literally hang on with the same strength as death's eternal endurance. The drunken waltz throughout the poem will develop into an extended metaphor that represents the family's dysfunction and the back and forth struggle that defines the father-son relationship. The irony here is that dances are usually pleasant and done or watched for entertainment, but this dance is one that appears to be difficult and dangerous. The father's point of view of merrily whizzing about drunkenly is juxtaposed with the boy's perspective, which is one of fear. The boy is hanging on for dear life. As the boy struggles to hold his own in this dance of death, it is interesting to note that the Death Waltz is a piece of music written for piano. It is infamous for its difficulty, which borders on impossibility. Now let's move on. We romped until the pans slid from the kitchen shelf. Here we see a pun and some very interesting diction. The wildness of the dance intensifies into a chaotic cacophony of violence as kitchen tools fall victim to the haphazard whirlwinding of the dancing duo. We don't have too many devices here to analyze, but let's pay attention once again to how diction can open up new worlds of meaning. As a verb, romp has 4 main meanings, each possibly worse than the rest. Meaning 1, to play roughly. Meaning 2, to oppress. Meaning 3, to defeat. Meaning 4, to engage in playful or boisterous sex. Just a side note here. That Vibes Cartel song, Romping Shop, makes clever use of this word's ambiguity, since we Jamaicans often use this word to mean rough play. This 4th meaning adds to the scene the possible element of sexual abuse. We know this sex, if there is any, would be abusive because of 2 main reasons. 1, this is a grown man and a little boy, well, a small boy. 2, we see how violent this romping is. There's also a devious pun at play within these lines. The pans are sliding from the kitchen shelf, but pan offers a variety of meanings that sneakily hide under the innocence of a frying skillet. For example, it means to belittle or put down, as well as to beat one's opposition convincingly. Only by digging into the diction do we uncover an overabundance of evidence that points to violence and abuse. We'll get back to pan a little bit later. Let's press on. My mother's countenance could not unfrown itself. Again, very strange diction is begging for our attention. By using negation, and in particular this kind of awkward double negative, the second line implies that the mother's countenance could have possibly unfrowned itself. Maybe it usually did. It is suggesting that she used to be able to hide her disapproval with a fake smile by unfrowning herself. Now she stands with her frown undone. More importantly, whether frowning or not, she stands and does nothing about this romping that is going on. Maybe if she tries to intervene, she will be romped with as well. Stating that her frown could not undo itself is a clever way to disempower the woman. The action, or more accurately the inaction, is attributed to her face, not to her, indicating that she is powerless. Furthermore, we don't really get a good glimpse at what is happening in her mind, in her thoughts. All we can see is her frown not being able to be undone. Even so, her inaction isn't nearly the worst part. The true reason behind her frown could be even darker than you would guess. Let's go back to the punny pan from line 5. This word is actually commonly used as a shortening for pansexual. Heterosexuals are attracted to people of the opposite gender. Homosexuals are attracted to people of the same gender. Pansexuals, much like but perhaps much more indiscriminate than bisexuals, don't care about gender at all. I think the mother could be upset because her husband has chosen to romp with this boy instead of with her, and all she gets to do is watch. Now let's go deeper into the darkness. What if this mother who is watching her son be abused doesn't disapprove at all? What if she's actually into all this? What if this is her idea? Diction again frightens us. Countenance usually means facial expression, but ominously, it is also a verb that means to sanction or approve, usually legally. Something can be countenanced by the court, for example. So, if the mother approves of the abuse, why does she frown? The frown could signal some remnant of her parental conscience that lingers within. Now let's go even deeper. The hand that held my wrist was battered on one knuckle. The battered knuckle here has a range of literal and metaphorical implications. 1. The father is hardworking and manual labor has bruised his knuckles. This would be similar to describing a hand as contoured or callous in order to suggest that someone is hardworking. Possibility 2. The father physically abuses the boy and the knuckle bruises are from punching. Possibility 3. The father himself is hurt. Maybe his father used to romp with him, making this dangerous dance as cyclic as it is unrhythmic. And possibility 4. Just as romp can mean to defeat, knuckle can mean to surrender. Maybe the boy has finally surrendered, his efforts to fight back amounting only to bruises on his attacker's knuckle. But let's go further still. At every step you missed, my right ear scraped a buckle. Here we see metaphor and alliteration. The literal waltz continues, and since the father is drunk, he's expectedly having a lot of missteps, each inflicting physical pain upon the clinging boy. In line 2, the boy is said to be small. This couplet gives us a more graphic sense of the size of the boy relative to that of the man. We see that the boy's height extends only to the man's waist, where the belt buckle scrapes his ear ever so often. Now let's dig past the literalness of this couplet, examining arguably the most poignant metaphor of this poem. Each time the father misses a step in life, each time he makes a mistake, a bad decision, it is the boy who gets scraped, who suffers. Now let's return to the literal to dig for some even more gruesome treasure. This time, let's zoom into every pixel of the second line. With each of the father's missteps, the boy's right ear scrapes a buckle. Not your, his, or the buckle, a buckle. This underspecification suggests the ear scraping has happened on multiple occasions with numerous different belts, and therefore possibly by many different men. Buckle suggests belt buckle, which suggests flogging. But there is still more depth to be reached. So far, hidden synonyms have added defeat and surrender to the poem. Now we have buckle to play with, which a little more conspicuously than the previous words means to give in or yield. More graphically, and reaching again into the disturbing world of incestuous rape, buckle also means to make bend. This bending action doesn't do us any favors. Remember the mother's countenance that couldn't unfrown itself? Buckle can also mean a contorted expression as of the face. This boy is not happy. Sex is what consummates a marriage. Two become one not when rings, but when bodily fluids are exchanged. This drunken, incestuous waltz with a minor is not only disturbing, but it's actually consummatory. We finally get to why the boy's watching mother is frowning. The man is flat out leaving her for their son, with the full intention of marrying the boy. You see, yet another meaning of buckle is to unite in marriage. This drunken man is so delusional, so irreparably insane, that he believes that he is becoming one with his son, not just sexually, not just physically, but also matrimonially. Now try not to picture what comes next, for if you do, your soul is damned. The boy's ear is being scraped by the father's belt buckle. It means his head is in the immediate vicinity of this drunken man's crotch. Theodore Roethke did a good job to cover his tracks, but this gruesome and unfathomable act of oral sex has been dug up and seen for what it truly is. Now let's go on. You beat time on my head with a palm caked hard by dirt. Just because I am at the brink of damnation myself, I will not excavate the messy multiplicity of meanings embedded in head. By now, with what we have uncovered, you will be able to figure that out on your own. Coupling head in the first line with hand in the second line is also overly suspicious, but we won't even go there. Instead of taking the highway to hell, let's look at the metaphors that are tucked into this violent attempt of the father to teach his son the rhythm of the waltz. Possibility 1. The second line could suggest that the father not only works hard, but does dirty work. Whether this dirty work means manual labor or criminal activity is a question that could be asked. Possibility 2. The dirt that has caked the father's palm is indicative of the grimy messiness of his mind. He is a dirty old man, isn't he? Let's move on. Then waltz me off to bed, still clinging to your shirt. To close, two powerful metaphors make themselves clear in the last two lines. One, the boy has survived. He has overcome. He has managed to cling to life, even after having suffered this dangerous dance. Possibility two, because his father's abuse is the only thing he knows, the boy clings to it even when he becomes old enough to make his own decisions. Clinging to his father's shirt, he will one day become, or already is, the drunken dancer. Well, that was one bumpy ride, wasn't it? At this point, all puns are intended. In an upcoming video, we'll take a deep look at Little Boy Crying by Mervyn Morris. Let's look at line 1. Your mouth contorting in brief spite and hurt. Oh boy, I wonder what awaits us here. As always, thanks for watching.